In the fall of 1919, black farmers in Phillips County, Arkansas, did something both ordinary and dangerous. They organized, they pooled their money, and they hired a lawyer because they believed white landowners were cheating them out of the cotton they had grown. Within days, armed white men were hunting black residents through the countryside. Federal troops occupied the area. Hundreds of black people were detained, and 12 men were sentenced to death after rushed trials before all-white juries. White officials and newspapers called it an insurrection, but the conflict began with a demand for honest accounting. Phillips County stood in the Arkansas Delta, a landscape shaped by cotton and plantation power. Many black families worked land they did not own. Under sharecropping, an owner provided land and often advanced seed, food, tools, or other supplies. At harvest, the crop was sold, expenses were deducted, and the farmer was supposed to receive an agreed share. In practice, the landowner or an associated merchant often controlled the account. They recorded the charges. They handled the cotton. They calculated what, if anything, the farmer would be paid. A family could work an entire season and then be told that the books showed another year of debt. Not every contract was identical, but the imbalance was built into the system. The person who owed the sharecropper money often also controlled the ledger used to decide how much was owed. The 1919 harvest made that struggle especially urgent. Cotton commanded high prices, promising unusually valuable returns. Black veterans were coming home from the First World War, and black communities across the country were pressing more forcefully for rights they had long been denied. At the same time, 1919 became known for a wave of white attacks on black communities. Elaine would become the deadliest episode of that red summer. In Phillips County, Robert Lee Hill helped found the Progressive Farmers and Household Union of America. By 1919, the union had chapters around Elaine. Its members were largely black sharecroppers and tenant farmers. Their purpose was economic: secure fair settlements for their cotton and challenge false accounting. They collected dues and pooled money to obtain legal help. The union engaged Ulysses S. Bratton, a white attorney in Little Rock. The farmers were not simply complaining among themselves. They were preparing to challenge planter power with organization, documentation, and counsel. That made the union a direct threat to the local order. Even association with the farmers' legal effort carried danger. Bratton's son, Osier, took part in consultations with union members. He was threatened and arrested. The white people authorities pursued were connected to the union's law office, while the armed white attackers escaped prosecution. That contrast reveals what local officials treated as the greater offense: violence against black residents or assistance to black farmers challenging their accounts. One farmer's story shows what was at stake. William Wardlaw reportedly farmed 16 acres and produced 16 bales of cotton. According to the historical account, those bales were valued at $225 each. Wardlaw said he was cheated of the proceeds. Imagine the year behind those 16 bales: planting, chopping weeds, tending the crop, and picking cotton by hand. Then imagine the final settlement taking place over a book you did not control. The demand was simple: account for the crop and pay the people who produced it. On the night of September 30th, roughly 100 black people, mostly sharecroppers, gathered at a church in Hoop Spur near Elaine. Armed black guards stood outside because organizers feared surveillance or attack. A vehicle approached carrying 3 people: W.A. Adkins, a white Missouri Pacific security officer; Charles Pratt, a white Phillips County deputy sheriff; and a black jail trustee known as Kid Collins. What happened next remains disputed. Accounts conflict over why the men were there and who fired first. The evidence does not justify resolving that question with certainty. Gunfire broke out. Adkins was killed. Pratt was seriously wounded. Collins escaped unharmed. Local white authorities rapidly presented the shooting as evidence of a planned black uprising. A local committee and sections of the white press alleged that black residents intended to kill white people and seize control of the county. Modern historical research does not support that insurrection story. The documented organization at Hoop Spur was a farmers' union meeting about cotton settlements and legal representation. Yet the uprising claim gave officials and armed civilians a justification for overwhelming force. The sheriff summoned a posse. Between 500 and 1,000 armed white people entered the area from nearby Arkansas counties and from across the Mississippi River. In the Elaine area, black residents outnumbered white residents by about 10 to 1, a fact officials used to feed fear of rebellion. But numbers alone conceal who held power. White officials controlled the government, the courts, and the public story. Armed white groups moved through the countryside shooting black residents in fields, along roads, and near their homes. Many of the people targeted had no known connection to the Union. The 4 Johnston brothers were among them. David, Gibson, Lewis, and Leroy Johnston had been returning from a hunting trip. Warned not to travel by road through Elaine, they took a train instead. A white mob removed them from that train and killed them. Leroy Johnston had served in the celebrated 369th Infantry during the First World War. He had been wounded in France and awarded the French Croix de Guerre. His military record offered no protection when he returned to Arkansas. Neither he nor his brothers were known to have participated in the Union meeting. Arkansas Governor Charles Hillman Breaux asked the federal government for help. On October 2nd, more than 500 United States Army troops arrived from Camp Pike. The Army's role is one of the massacre's contested questions. Witness accounts and later scholarship accuse troops of killing black residents. Army reports minimize the number killed by soldiers, and historians still dispute the extent of military participation. What is clear is that the arrival of federal troops did not produce an impartial accounting of what had happened. No exact death toll is possible. Records were incomplete. Violence spread across a rural landscape, and white officials had reason to minimize black deaths. More than 100 black people were killed. Many historians and public history institutions place the likely toll above 200. 5 white people also died. That uncertainty should not be mistaken for doubt that a mass killing occurred. It reflects the conditions under which the victims died and the failures of the institutions responsible for recording their deaths. People were killed across fields and roads rather than at a single documented site. Official accounts emerged from authorities invested in the uprising narrative. Black survivor testimony, oral history, contemporary investigations, and later scholarship preserved evidence the official story obscured. No white attacker was prosecuted for killing black residents. Instead, authorities detained black survivors by the hundreds. Temporary stockades held men and women under armed guard. A documented 285 people were transferred to the Helena Jail, a facility built for 48. White employers could vouch for detained workers. Those released could be ordered back to the fields. Even inside military custody, the plantation hierarchy shaped who regained freedom and on what terms. Authorities turned mass detention into a search for evidence of conspiracy. Prisoners and witnesses later described beatings, whipping, and electric shocks used to force statements. Affidavits from both black and white witnesses supported allegations that officials tortured people until they gave the testimony demanded of them. A grand jury charged 122 black people with crimes including murder and night riding. The violence in the fields was being converted into prosecutions of the people who had survived it. The first 12 men tried for murder faced all-white juries, and court-appointed lawyers who performed almost no meaningful investigation. Defense attorney Jacob Fink later acknowledged that he had not interviewed witnesses. He did not request a change of venue, and he did not challenge a single juror. Some trials lasted less than an hour. Jury deliberations were measured in minutes. William Wardlaw, the farmer who said he had been cheated of 16 bales of cotton, was among the condemned. His jury reportedly deliberated for less than 2 minutes before sentencing him to death. 65 other defendants accepted sentences of up to 21 years for second-degree murder, rather than risk execution. The outward machinery of justice was present: a judge, lawyers, juries, verdicts. But the proceedings unfolded under mob domination after torture, in a county saturated with threats. The same system that had failed to protect black residents now treated their organization as proof of guilt. The convictions might have stood without a sustained legal campaign organized by black communities and the NAACP. Scipio Africanus Jones, a black lawyer in Little Rock, became central to that campaign. He raised money in the city's black community, investigated the cases, and worked with other counsel supported by the NAACP. The 12 condemned men were divided into 2 groups of 6, known as the Ware defendants and the Moore defendants. The legal fight lasted for years. In 1923, the United States Supreme Court decided Moore versus Dempsey. The court did not acquit the men or order their immediate release. It ruled that federal courts could not simply accept the outward appearance of a state trial when credible allegations showed that a mob had dominated the proceedings and the state had provided no real corrective process. The decision required a federal court to examine the facts behind the Moore defendants' habeas petition. Its importance extended beyond Elaine. It expanded meaningful federal review of state criminal convictions obtained under mob pressure and without genuine due process. That principle confronted a basic deception. A courtroom could appear orderly while fear dictated the outcome. A trial could have a judge and jury, yet provide no genuine hearing. By allowing federal courts to look behind those formal appearances, the decision created an important tool against convictions produced by racial terror. It did not transform the justice system overnight, but it rejected the idea that constitutional due process was satisfied merely because state officials had performed the motions of a trial. Even then, freedom was not immediate. The 6 Ware defendants were released through Arkansas proceedings in 1923. The Moore defendants remained incarcerated after their Supreme Court victory. Following negotiations and state executive action, they were finally released on January 13, 1925. The legal campaign saved lives. It did not deliver full justice. It did not prosecute the people who killed black residents. It did not restore the lost cotton, earnings, or property. It did not erase the torture, the years in prison, or the destruction of the Union. And that is why the economic beginning of this story matters. Elaine was not simply an eruption of abstract racial hatred. White supremacy protected a material system. Control over land, labor, credit, accounting, policing, and courts allowed one group to profit from another group's work. When black farmers organized to challenge that arrangement, violence defended the ledger. The insurrection story performed a second act of violence. It recast people seeking fair payment as criminals and presented armed attackers as guardians of public safety. White officials and newspapers spread that account, while black journalists, investigators, and the NAACP challenged it from the beginning. That resistance matters because the false account was never uncontested. Black investigators gathered prisoner testimony and exposed the economic dispute beneath the official version. Legal advocates carried those accounts into appeals. Community fundraising kept the defense alive over years. The eventual Supreme Court case was not an automatic correction by the system. It was the result of sustained work by people who refused to let the state's version become the only surviving record. The historical record now lets us see the structure more clearly. First came the crop, then the private accounting, then the union and the lawyer. After that came the false uprising story, the posses, the troops, the stockades, the torture, and the death sentences. The escalation was extreme, but it was not meaningless. An honest accounting threatened more than one disputed payment. Collective action threatened a labor system built on isolation and unequal power. The Elaine Massacre was racial terror, a labor conflict, and a collapse of legal justice. Its victims were attacked not because their demands were incomprehensible, but because those demands were clear. They wanted to know what their cotton had earned. They wanted the books to tell the truth, and they wanted to be paid. If this overlooked history matters to you, like this video and subscribe to The Real Stickman History for more stories like this one.